A sobering look at the cost of the rioting the nation has seen this summer. Axios is reporting vandalism and looting in the United States in the 2 weeks following the death of George Floyd will result in at least $1 to $2 billion in paid insurance claims, the highest price tag in the history of civil unrest in America. And that number could go higher. Also this, Congressman Andy Biggs of Arizona is planning to hold a special order on the House floor today to allow members to speak about recent riots and the possible resources or sources of funding behind the rioters. And also, he's an Arizona Republican, told Fox News this: it will be about law and order and attacks on police and neighborhood communities. We will be allowed to control time on the floor, and we're going to have a series of members come and speak to these issues. It's going to be a good group, a diverse group of speakers. It's from all over the conference. They'll all bring their own perspectives from their own districts and responses to what's going on, end quote. So, Newt Gingrich, do you think this is necessary, and how do you think it makes a difference to have these voices talk about this issue?
Look, I think it's very necessary. First of all, we were all told for a long time that these were peaceful demonstrations. Now we discover that they were anti-American looters, people, many of whom are organized across the country, such as Antifa. And it's legitimate to say, where does the money come from? How do you suddenly have people showing up in Kenosha from 44 different cities? They literally arrested people. Over half the people arrested in Kenosha were from out of town, from 44 different cities. How does this happen? Who's paying for it? Who's behind it? We've just discovered with all the wildfires in California that Portland, which has a really anti-police, pro-criminal district attorney, they actually released a guy who had started a forest fire, and he went out the next day and started 6 more. So I think it's legitimate to say, what's going on? How sick has the system become? Who's paying for it? And how do we go back? And remember, all of the mainstream media told us these were peaceful demonstrations. Now we're being told they were the most destructive in American history.
You know, I wrote down what you said, Speaker, because it was so interesting. How sick has the system become? That seems like such an important question to ask. Dagan, I think that you have some numbers that can indicate how bad it could get and how sick the system might be.
It's hard to quantify how much damage was done to these businesses and these communities. Normally, we're talking about insured losses. With a storm, and we're watching the Storm Sally today, you will have total damages that could be more than double the insured losses. And with rioting, most insurance policies don't cover riots. So we're talking about livelihoods destroyed forever, and a devastation for families and individuals, and particularly small businesses, that we could never be able to quantify. I just want to hear more outrage and more condemnation from all the people who talked about peaceful protest, because as the Speaker said, as Newt said, peaceful protests don't cost billions of dollars and destroy people's livelihoods.
Well, you know who knows this so well are those grieving families that we've seen, from George Floyd to Rayshard Brooks and so on this summer. They were calling for peace. Not only did they see the destruction of life, but they also saw the destruction of their own home cities and towns and so on and so forth, and had to have known at the time it wasn't going to make a bit of difference. It certainly wasn't bringing those loved ones back. So, Marie, as I come to you, I want to hear the answer to why. Why is this continuing to happen, and where are Democrats on the issue making a difference? They could be on the stump. They could be out there talking. And look, they're willing to defund the police and take notes and demands from the street. But can they talk back to the street to get people to go home and stop this?
Well, the leader of the Democratic Party has repeatedly condemned looting. That's Joe Biden, our nominee. He's been on the ground saying that.
Is that enough?
And I'm glad, Harris, that you mentioned the families of the Black Americans who have been killed by police officers that sort of set off a lot of these protests. They have also called for calm. The leaders of the peaceful protests have also condemned rioting over and over and over again. And so there was a study last week done that showed way over 90% of the protests in the wake of George Floyd Floyd's death were in fact peaceful. I think what will be interesting to see as these court cases unfold over the coming weeks and months of people arrested for looting and rioting, which again, Democrats have condemned across the board. Democratic leaders certainly have, Democratic elected officials have. What those motivations were. We have seen a variety of affiliations from the folks already arrested for looting and rioting. Some are members of far left groups, some are members of far right groups. There's a big mix here. And so I think as we determine who's responsible and how to prevent this in the future, candidly, we should look at those court cases. One more note, Harris, insurance also doesn't cover, in general, losses related to the coronavirus. So it has been a very long, hot, nasty summer for a lot of reasons for many of these businesses, including the wildfires and the hurricanes, and of course, coronavirus. It's been tough.
You know, Melissa, I did do a quick follow. I don't know if Marie can hear me. But is condemnation in your voice and in your words enough when you're not on the ground? Like, you've got to go to these people, and at least if it's not the peaceful protesters that you're talking to, talk to everybody else. Go home. The peaceful protesters have a right to be out there, but their voices, we can't even hear them anymore.
Harris, can I just say something real quick?
No, it's not enough. And the
right
reason
ahead.
why I know it's not enough is because I talk to these people all the time on my business show at 4 p.m. and we put faces to the different small businesses that have been destroyed. And I have to tell you, many of those faces that we've had on are black and brown, and they have created a business from the ground up that is their entire livelihood. And they stood there while looters, rioters, protesters, whatever you want to call them, smashed their windows, threatened their customers. Many of them, as Marie points out, were trying to recover from the coronavirus when these folks came along and torched their businesses and brought them to the ground. They haven't seen any sort of relief. No one has come to help them. And I think for a lot of people, they see the numbers around the destruction and they don't think about that every one of those businesses is a family, is a face, is a person who is now struggling and has no way to support their family. That's who I want to see in this hearing. I want America to see the faces of these people whose lives have been destroyed by this violence.
Yeah, it's so true. They represent everybody,
Harris.
right? Speaker Gingrich, I know you have a final thought for us.
Yeah, look, the number one problem in almost all these cities is George Soros elected left-wing, anti-police, pro-criminal district attorneys who refuse to keep people locked up. Just yesterday, they put somebody back on the street who's wanted for 2 different murders in New York City. You cannot solve this problem, and both Harris and Biden have talked very proudly about what they call progressive district attorneys. Progressive district attorneys are anti-police, pro-criminal, and overwhelmingly elected with George Soros' money, and they're a major cause of the violence we're seeing because they keep putting the violent criminals back on the street.
I'm not sure we need to bring George Soros into this.
I was going to say you get the last word, Speaker.
He paid for it. I mean, why can't we discuss the fact that millions of dollars he spent?
I agree with Melissa. George Soros doesn't need to be a part of this conversation.
Okay. So it's verboten.
All right, we're going to. Okay, we're going to move on. A historic day at the White House. We covered it from stem to stern, for major change in the Middle East. However, maybe not according to some of the broadcast news networks or even those on cable. The Speaker Gingrich gives us his take on Israel normalizing relations with 2 Gulf state neighbors next.
They are choosing a future in which Arabs and Israelis, Muslims, Jews, and Christians can live together, pray together, and dream together